What's up, everybody? Welcome to Midweek Multiplied. So today I want to talk about words, and obviously these words are near and dear to my heart. So I want to look at the same exact words at different perspectives, or from different perspectives in my life. And so what I'm talking about is the words of my wife, Rachel, to me, when she says to me, "I love you." So I was thinking back, and the first time Rachel ever told me that she loved me was when I was 21 years old and she was 19 years old. And I remember the first time she said those words to me and how that made me feel. And I just remember thinking, like, it can't get any better than this. And I was an idiot 21-year-old, and I just didn't know what I didn't know. But for me, that was like the pinnacle. Like, we had both come out of pretty intense seasons in our lives. I'd found this girl, and she said those words to me, and I was like, "This is it." But I was 21 years old, and so thinking back on that moment, now sitting in this room doing this video for you guys today, I think about literally Rachel telling me those words right now. And I think about the significance that those exact same words carry. And I just didn't know because I didn't have the experiences I have now. We've gone through marriage. Like, we stood up in front of all of our friends and family and said, "I'm going to commit myself to you until the day I die." And then we've gone through jobs and moves to a city, moves to Fort Smith, and all of this heartache and hard times and good times and dogs and all sorts of different things. Since that first time she told me, "I love you." And when she says, "I love you" now, it just means so much more to me. It was amazing then, and it's amazing now in a different way. And then I think about, as weird as this is to mention, I think about those same words, "I love you," when she says those to me. And I think a lot about her grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. It's a moment a few years ago that they had this big celebration to commemorate 50 years of marriage. And they were surrounded by all of their family and friends to celebrate this marriage. And it was an amazing testament to their lives, really, and really to their marriage. And this fullness, this room was just full of love. And so, as weird as it is to say, when Rachel tells me, "I love you, Cade," a lot of times I think that statement helps me hope forward. It takes me to the future of, like, man, with it, I know Rachel loves me in that same way that her grandfather and grandmother loved one another. And so it's a hope for the future that we can have a marriage like theirs and a life like theirs. And maybe, who knows what the future holds, but that's what I think of, is this one statement at different moments, and looking at it from different perspectives, it has this full meaning. And so when Rachel tells me, "I love you," it carries with it significance that was so good in the past, it's so good in the present, and yet it hopes forward to the future. And all of that is one story, though. When she says, "I love you," that's one full story. It's a story of our relationship. And so today, these prophets that we're looking at, we're going to look at Isaiah. They were prophesying in a specific time, in a specific place. But they were looking forward to the future as well. And as far as they could see, this was one big continuous story. So just as the words "I love you" coming from my wife Rachel to me have so many different levels of meaning, I want to argue that the words of Isaiah the prophet, they have levels of meaning as well. And so this is one of those things where this lesson is about Isaiah, but it's really not. This is really just a case study. So we're specifically going to be looking at Isaiah 52 verses 7 through 10. So flip over there because we're going to read it a few times. But I want to read this from different perspectives. The first being the Old Testament era. So if we look at it this level, level one, a straightforward reading, like, what is this good news? Because this is about good news. But what is the good news here to the exiles? So we talked about how the Israelites had a kingdom, but there's some things that happened that split the kingdom. So this is confusing, but you have Israel in the north and you have Judah in the south. And so you have these two separate kingdoms that once were all Israel, but now you have Israel and Judah. And so you have these prophets come. They're trying to call the people back to God. And so many prophets warned that God will send Israel and Judah into exile because they're consistently breaking their covenant with Him. They're consistently being idolatrous, chasing after other gods and rebelling against God. And so you have Isaiah himself, who lived in Jerusalem. That's in Judah, in the southern nation, the southern tribe, in the latter half of this saga of the kingdom period. So he lives in Jerusalem, but he prophesies to both the leaders of Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And he says, if you continue in this way, the God is going to use the Assyrians. He's going to raise up this nation called the Assyrians, and then later the Babylonians, to take you into exile to execute God's justice. And in a really sad turn of events, that happens. Just that. Jerusalem itself is destroyed in 587 BC. And the people are hauled off into exile in Babylon. And a lot of times, guys, like we talk about this like this is a story, or even, this is just a historical fact, but I want you guys to see the despair of this, the reality of this situation. Like, see the pain first before we jump to the good news. Imagine this. Feel the terror of the suffering. If someone came in to take over our city, if there was an invading foreign nation, the suffering as they take over and seize control. You have 18 months in this situation in Jerusalem where they're under siege. 18 months, that's a year and a half that they were under attack. So starvation sets in, disease sets in. And in the final days of destruction, there is slaughter, there is looting. This is real life people. This is their story, the story of God's people. And try to imagine with me as they're being led out of that city. It's burning to the ground. There's death and bloodshed quite literally all around them as they're walking out of their city. And they're being goaded forward by the tip of a spear. They're having to walk into exile. It'd be like someone coming in, destroying Fort Smith, taking UAFS, burning it to the ground, and poking us forward as they walk us to Oklahoma or Louisiana or something like that. It's reminiscent of the Trail of Tears. It's extremely sad and extremely painful. And how would you feel if that were you? Would you feel like, God, you're powerless or absent when we need you the most? Would you feel like things were better when we were worshiping other gods and when we are worshiping you? And we don't deserve this, God. How could you allow this kind of cruelty to happen to us? Or maybe we did deserve this. Is this the end of our relationship, God? Is this the end of our story together? I want you guys to know that the biblical books, the Old Testament prophets, they address all of these questions because this is real questions that people have when this happened. And the story of the Old Testament, like all of these books, are so multifaceted and relevant for your life. So if you connected with any of those questions, you can find that in the Old Testament. And so in the text today, we're placed with those in exile, waiting. And at this point, they've been there for 2 generations. So imagine all of that chaos and destruction and being led away. And then 2 generations, you're sitting around waiting. Jerusalem, this great city, is just a city of burned out ruins, just sitting there. And people are asking, is there ever going to be a day, God? We're waiting. Is there ever going to be a day? You allowed Nebuchadnezzar to destroy our city, to haul us off into exile. Is there ever going to be a day when we get to return home, where you scoop us up? Is anything going to happen? And then we get the story from Isaiah, or these words from Isaiah 52, verse 7 through 10. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring the good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good tidings, who proclaim salvation, to say to Zion, your God reigns. Listen, your watchmen lift up their voices. Together they shout for joy. When the Lord returns to Zion, they will see it with their own eyes. Burst into songs of joy together, you ruins of Jerusalem, for the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord will lay bare his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth will see the salvation of our God. So as the people are sitting and waiting in exile, they're shackled, hopeless, a messenger comes running across the mountains and the hills with this news. And the news is God is leading you out of here. The exile is over and you're going home. The story of God's purposes through Israel, through you, to bless all the nations to the ends of the earth. It's not over. It's going to continue. God is not done with you. This is not the end of your story. God is still in control. God is saving you. God cares. God is good. So imagine really getting that news, because these people really got that news. Get ready to go home to Jerusalem. God is in control. He's reigning. He's going to return you to the city, and he's taking you with him. God is leading you home. No more shame, no more exile. And we have a tendency to think of this as just stories, but this is real people experiencing this. And so God saves these people who deserved to be exiled because of their unfaithfulness, to be banished from his presence. So they went into exile and God saves them. He brings them home. So what does this say about God? So now I want to look at these exact same words in Isaiah 52 in reference to Jesus. So some things have happened. Jesus Christ has come, and we have to acknowledge that. And so how do we read these words in Isaiah in light of Christ Jesus? And so let's look at the good news of Isaiah as revealed after Christ. Let's use that and let's reflect back. So I want you guys to understand, and this is an extremely important distinction for us to make. This does not mean that we have to find Jesus in every single text of the Old Testament prophets or in the Old Testament. But it does mean that we should be aware that these texts are all a part of a great historical and spiritual journey that leads to Christ. And I hope you see the distinction there. So what does this mean in light of Jesus? And so just like Rachel's words to me, I love you, the exact same words. So they meant something whenever she very first told me that. But they mean something fuller, you might say, after all the experiences we've shared in our past 6 years of marriage. And so I want you to take that perspective. So God has saved the exiles. He has led them back home. That is amazing. And so these prophets like Isaiah, they were warning, like, you guys are going to get sent into exile. Israel, Judah, you're going to go into exile. But they consistently broke the covenant. And because they broke the covenant, were sinful, they had to be banished. They had to be exiled from the presence of God. So sin and rebellion against God, idolatry, disqualifies them, it disqualified them, and it disqualifies us from being in the presence of God. Our sin, our unfaithfulness, exiles us. So, later when you have Jesus, God in the flesh, whenever he enters the world, you still have people trying to white knuckle it. And we see this best in the stories about the Pharisees. They're trying to white knuckle it. And what I mean by that is they're trying everything they can do by their own power to keep the law. Everything that they can do to be self-sufficient, to not mess up. We see this in the Pharisees. They thought if unfaithfulness is the problem, if we can't keep the covenant and that's the problem, if that's our problem with God, it's sin. If sin is the problem, we just won't mess up. We'll just do everything perfect. We just won't sin. So you might think that the Pharisees are crazy, maybe even chuckling at their thoughts and their behaviors, but you might be doing the exact same thing or having the exact same thoughts. You might be thinking, have I done enough for God? Have I done enough to be good? Have I done enough to be in your presence? God, have I gone to church enough? God, have I read my Bible enough? God, have I kept your rules enough? And the really, really bad news for you is no, you have not done enough. None of us have done enough. We are all sinners. And as a penalty for sin, we can't be around a holy God. We have to be away from a holy God. We deserve exile. We deserve death. We deserve to be cut off from God forever. We deserve eternal banishment from the presence of God. We're just as helpless as the Israelites, sitting in shackles in Babylon. We don't have the power to even help ourselves. So what do? Then the words of Isaiah speak to us. Isaiah 52:7. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring the good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good tidings, who proclaim salvation, who say to Zion, your God reigns. Listen, your watchmen lift up their voices. Together they shout for joy. When the Lord returns to Zion, they will see it with their own eyes. Burst into songs of joy together, you ruins of Jerusalem. For the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord will lay bare his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth will see the salvation of our God. The good news in Isaiah, as revealed in Jesus Christ, is thank God it isn't up to how good we are. It is about how good Jesus is, about how good God is, that God has had mercy on us. So it really is good news that we don't get what we deserve and remain in exile. Do you realize how good of news that is? For me, for you, we don't have a shot without Jesus. We cannot stand before God if we don't have Jesus. We will always remain in exile. But these words, man, how beautiful are the feet that bring the good news. And this makes so much more sense to me in light of Jesus. We read John the Baptist's words. When John the Baptist first sees Jesus, he says, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And that means so much more to me in light of Isaiah and in light of Jesus. How beautiful are the feet of Jesus, who brings the good news to us, that God has come back through Jesus, the person of Jesus, to save us and to lead us out of sin and darkness, the dominion of sin and darkness. Jesus is leading us out, and it's only him that can lead us out. God is doing it again. And what does this say about God? So this final perspective I want to look at Isaiah 52 from is the good news for the whole world. And so just as Rachel told me, I love you the very first time, and that meant something different. It means something different now than it did then. It also makes me think and hope forward for the future of what could be, of the reality that we're heading towards. So I want you guys to think about that as we are looking at these verses as well. So the bad news is, and I don't have to spend a ton of time on this because you get it. The popular belief out there is that the world is going to hell in a handbasket. It's just going down, down, down. It's going down the toilet. There's division, there's war, there's scarcity, there's suicide, depression, whole generations feeling like they don't have purpose. Maybe you feeling like you don't have purpose. That people don't feel like they have meaning or significance. Life is meaningless. We're just on a ball, floating around the universe, and eventually the sun's going to burn out. And that is the common worldview of the future. So people are living right now, for whatever the reason is, all those things I just mentioned. Right now, people are living in their own version of exile. It's just doom and despair and depression, hopelessness, sin and darkness. You may know someone right now, Maybe it's you. Maybe it's your suite mate. Maybe it's the person in the class that you have that is completely hopeless. They're sitting there waiting for good news. Just like the exiles, just like the Israelites sitting in shackles in Babylon. Just like the Pharisees of Jesus' day saying there's got to be something better than this type of faith of just working our way into salvation. They're waiting for good news. There's got to be purpose. So what is the good news here, Cade? What's the good news for the world? Isaiah 52:10, I hope that you notice this in the study. The prophet moves onto the global stage. He starts talking about to all the nations, to the ends of the earth. And this is a reflection back to the promise to Abraham in Genesis 12 that Abraham, I'm going to bless you, and through your family that's going to grow into a nation, all other nations, all of the people on earth will be blessed. And so this is the ultimate vision of this prophecy in Isaiah, to the ends of the earth. Just as God came back for the people of Israel, He will come back for the whole earth. This is the ultimate fulfillment of these words in Isaiah. Jesus is coming back. Jesus Christ will return to reign over the entire earth and to redeem all of His people. And this is what's crazy. He's going to redeem people, but He's also going to redeem the rest of creation, including the earth itself. And there will be people from every nation, tribe, and tongue worshiping Him. Man, this is a better story. This is a better alternative than to the hopelessness and dread and doom. The end of the story is that Jesus is coming back and God will save His people. He's going to fix the brokenness of humanity and the brokenness of all the earth. If you are a Christian, this is the Christian story. This is the end of our story. These words in Isaiah hope forward. This is the good news. So we worship this God that He says that's our future. What does that say about Him? So where are we to go from here? So all around us, I know that there are people still living in sin. They're still living in darkness. And they have no hope. They're not even looking for good news. They have no purpose. They feel like their lives are meaningless. There's no hope for the future. There's no hope for the world. There's no hope for humanity. It's just a dark, dark place to live, to be in that state. So if you believe the Christian message, if you believe what we read in Isaiah, we have good news. We have good news. And so if we have this, then sharing the gospel, sharing good news is an act of mercy. It's an act of mercy. And so Paul, whenever he writes the book of Romans in the New Testament, after Jesus has died and been resurrected, Paul picks up on this language that we see in Isaiah, and it's beautiful. In Romans 10, chapter 14 and 15, Paul says this, "How can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news." You could be that. You could have mercy on people by sharing them the hope that is in Jesus Christ. But how can people believe? How can they receive this good news if no one is sharing it with them? So I'm asking you to be merciful. Be the feet that are beautiful, that bring the good news to people. So to put a nice little bow on this lesson and really the whole year in the study of the Old Testament, we are looking at who God is and what He did in and through people in the Old Testament. Then we looked at how God, what He's like, revealed through Jesus, and then it also helps us reflect and hope forward of what God will do. So all of these things are coming together as we've studied the Old Testament. And so for me, this is a lot like a capstone course. If you don't know what that is, a capstone course is basically intended, it's like a senior level course intended for you to apply everything that you've learned, all the skills, knowledge, and competencies you've gained over the course of your college career into one class and really one assignment. So you have to bring it all together. And so that's what this makes me think of. That the Old Testament helps us learn about who God is and then reflect forward and think about the New Testament and who God is there. And then it helps us think even further forward to who God is in the future and what He's going to do with us and all of creation. It just brings this fuller understanding of who God is. Much like the words, "I love you," coming from Rachel, they have such a full meaning when seen from different perspectives. It's amazing to think about our future, but it's also amazing to reflect back. They all have meaning, and it's this one big story. And it's amazing. The same words, but they just have such a full meaning looked at from different perspectives. I hope reading from these different perspectives in Isaiah 52 helped you put it all into perspective, to just look at God. Look at God. See the fullness of God's story, the richness of the meanings of Isaiah 52 when seen from the perspective of how God has been at work with us people for forever and will continue to work with us. We see that this is the story of God at work among His people when He rescues them from exile. This is what He did. This is how God works. This is His family. And then we saw God, how He continues to save His people and lead them out of exile through Jesus. And God, the words are amazing when seen from that perspective. And then also it helps us reflect forward and see that God is continuing to lead us out of darkness, and He will stamp out darkness forever when Jesus returns again. And it helps us hope forward for that future when all nations, tribes, and tongues will be in His city. This is one single story. This is God's story. And the crazy thing is He invites us into this story. So tonight, I usually end with a question to reflect on. I think it would be great for you guys to just talk about how this study of the Old Testament has brought a fuller understanding of God. How does this help you with the New Testament? How does reading the New Testament make you think back to the Old and even think forward to the future about what God is doing in your life, in your small group, on your campus, and in your city? So you guys talk about how the Old Testament has enriched your understanding of God and your relationship with God.